The alarm in my skull went off before the alarm on the ship did. I was standing 3 steps behind the little girl when I felt it, that cold drop in my stomach that always came right before something went wrong. I had felt it on a dozen worlds, in a dozen wars, and I had learned a long time ago never to ignore it. Her name was Elira. She was 7 years old, if you could compare her age to a human child, and she was the only daughter of the Princess Queen Morel, heir to the throne of the Velkaran Dominion. I was her shadow, not her guard, not officially. Officially, I was a human liaison attached to the royal household, a leftover from a treaty nobody in this palace liked. Unofficially, for 6 months, I had been the only person Elira trusted enough to hold her hand in a crowded room. We were walking through the sapphire concourse, a long hallway lined with crystal windows that looked out over the capital city of Dorith. Alien nobles in flowing robes moved past us, bowing their heads slightly at the sight of the young princess. Everything felt normal, too normal. Then I saw him, a servant, or someone dressed like one, standing near a support column at the far end of the hall. He was too still. Everyone else in that hallway was moving, talking, gliding along in that graceful way the Velkaran walked, like their bones were lighter than ours. But this one man stood frozen, watching her. My hand moved to Elira's shoulder before my brain finished the thought. "Something wrong, Daniel?" she asked, tilting her head up at me. Her eyes were a pale violet, too large for her small face, innocent in a way that made my chest hurt. "Stay close," I said quietly. I did not know yet what was about to happen. I only knew that the feeling in my gut had never once been wrong. The servant reached into his sleeve. I had exactly 1 second to make a decision, and 1 second was enough, because my body already knew what to do before my mind caught up. 6 years in the Human Expeditionary Corps had taught me that when your instincts scream, you do not stop to ask why. I stepped in front of Elira. The device in the man's hand was small, no bigger than a coin, and it made almost no sound when it fired. A thin line of light crossed the hallway, so fast that a Velkaran eye would never have caught it. I did not see it either. I only felt it, a burning line across my chest, like someone had pressed a hot wire against my ribs and dragged it sideways. For a Velkaran, that single strike would have been enough. Their bodies were beautiful, brilliant, capable of things human bodies could never do. But they were built like glass wrapped in silk. A wound like that would have stopped their hearts in seconds. Their entire culture was built around that fragility. Nobody touched a member of the royal family, not even in greeting. Nobody raised a hand near them, not even in jest. To harm one of them, even by accident, was the deepest shame a Velkaran could carry. I was not Velkaran. I staggered back a step, my hand pressing against the burning line on my chest, and I heard Elira scream my name. The sound of it, so small and so afraid, cut through the pain more than the pain itself did. "I'm fine," I said, though I was not entirely sure that was true yet. "Stay behind me." The attacker was already moving, already reaching for something else in his sleeve, a second device meant to finish what the first one started. I did not think about strategy. I did not think about protocol. I crossed the distance between us in 3 strides and put him on the ground the way I had been trained to do 100 times before, pinning his arm before the second device could ever leave his hand. Guards finally arrived, alerted by the screaming, by the commotion, by the sight of a human standing over a fallen attacker with a wound across his chest that should have already killed him. They stood there for a moment, frozen, staring at me the way you might stare at something that defied the laws of physics. "He is still standing," one of them whispered, in their own language, forgetting for a moment that I understood every word. I looked down at the wound. The fabric of my uniform was scorched and dark with blood, but I was still standing, still breathing, still very much alive. My heart was pounding hard, faster than I would have liked, but it was pounding, and that was the only thing that mattered. Elira ran to me before anyone could stop her, wrapping her small arms around my leg, sobbing into the fabric of my trousers. I put a hand on her head, careful, gentle, the way you would touch something precious. "I'm okay," I told her, even though the world was starting to tilt slightly at the edges. "I'm okay, Illyra." I was not entirely sure that was true either. The guards finally moved, surrounding the fallen attacker, calling for reinforcements, calling for the medical wing, calling for anyone who could explain what they were seeing. A human, struck by a weapon meant to end a life in an instant, was still on his feet. I felt the strength leaving my legs slowly, like sand running out of an hourglass. I lowered myself down before I fell down, sitting against the crystal window, with Illyra still holding on to me, her small hands gripping my sleeve like she was afraid I would disappear if she let go. "You are hurt," she said, her voice shaking. "You are hurt because of me." "No," I said, and I meant it with everything I had left. "I am hurt because someone tried to hurt you. That is very different." Word must have spread through the palace faster than sound itself, because within minutes I heard the unmistakable rhythm of the royal guard marching down the concourse, their ceremonial armor clinking against the polished floor, and behind them, moving faster than any Velkaran noble I had ever seen move, was Princess Queen Morel herself. She was tall, even by Velkaran standards, with skin the color of pale gold and eyes that could freeze a room with a single glance. She was known across the Dominion for her composure, for never once losing her calm in public, not during wars, not during scandals, not during the loss of her own mother years before. She was not calm now. "Illyra," she said, her voice cracking on the single word, and she dropped to her knees beside her daughter without a shred of the dignity her position demanded. Her hands moved over the girl's small body, checking, searching, terrified that somewhere beneath the surface there was a wound she could not see. "I am not hurt, Mother," Illyra said. "Daniel is hurt. He stood in front of me." The Princess Queen's eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment I saw something in her expression that I had never expected to see directed at me. Not gratitude, not yet. Something closer to disbelief, as if her mind was struggling to process what her eyes were telling her. "You took the strike," she said slowly, as if testing the words in her mouth for the first time. "It seemed like the thing to do," I said, and even I could hear how strange that sounded, like I was talking about stepping aside for someone in a doorway, rather than stepping into the path of a weapon built to kill. "That weapon," she said, her voice lower now, almost a whisper, "was calibrated to stop a heart in less than 2 seconds. I have seen it used before. I have buried people because of it." "My heart is still going," I said. "Feel free to check." It was a strange thing to say, maybe even a foolish thing to say, to the second most powerful woman in the entire Dominion while I was bleeding on her palace floor, but the pain was starting to make my thoughts loose and light, and somewhere underneath the fear, I still felt an odd, stubborn need to make the moment feel less terrifying for the child still gripping my sleeve. The Princess Queen did not smile, but something in her shoulders loosened, just slightly. "Get the medical team," she said to the guards, her voice snapping back into its familiar command. "Now, and someone find out who sent that man, and why nobody stopped him before he reached my daughter." The guards scattered like startled birds. I felt Illyra's grip on my sleeve tighten again, and I looked down at her small face, streaked with tears, and I tried to give her the most reassuring smile I could manage given the circumstances. "You are going to be fine," she whispered to me, though it sounded more like a question than a statement. "I plan on it," I said. "I have never been very good at giving up." The medical team arrived faster than I expected, a group of Velkaran healers in pale blue robes, carrying equipment I did not recognize and instruments that hummed with soft light. They knelt around me, scanning the wound with careful, practiced hands, murmuring to each other in quick, clipped words I was too tired to fully follow. "The wound should have been fatal," one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. "There is no explanation for how he is conscious." "There is an explanation," the Princess Queen said, still kneeling nearby, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "His body is not like ours." I wanted to tell her that it was not magic, that it was simply biology, that human bodies had evolved on a world full of danger, full of predators and violence and hardship, and that our bones and blood and stubborn hearts had learned a long time ago how to survive things that should have killed us. But my tongue felt heavy, and my vision was beginning to blur at the edges, and I thought it might be a good time to stop talking and let the healers do their work. The last thing I remembered before the darkness took me was Illyra's small hand slipping into mine, and the sound of the Princess Queen's voice, quiet but fierce, saying something I was not meant to hear. "Whatever he needs," she said to the healers, "whatever it costs, you will keep him alive. That is not a request." I did not know it yet, lying there on that crystal floor with my blood staining the polished stone beneath me, but that single sentence was about to change the entire course of my life. I had come to this palace as nothing more than a formality, a human face attached to a treaty nobody cared about, easily forgotten, easily replaced. I would not be forgotten now. The darkness closed in around me, warm and heavy, and somewhere far away I thought I heard Illyra crying my name, and I wanted more than anything to open my eyes and tell her one more time that everything was going to be fine. I could not be sure, in that final moment before I lost consciousness entirely, whether I actually believed that myself. But I was still breathing, and for now that was enough. I woke up to the sound of two people arguing in a language that was not mine, though after 6 months in the palace I understood every word of it. "He is a foreign national," a voice said, sharp and clipped. "You cannot simply declare him bound to the royal house because he happened to survive an attack that should have killed him. There are laws, Morel. There are treaties." "I know exactly what there are," the Princess Queen answered, and even through my closed eyes I could hear the steel in her voice. "I also know that my daughter is alive, because a man threw himself between her and a killing strike without a single second of hesitation. Do not lecture me about laws while my daughter still has nightmares waiting for her tonight." I kept my eyes shut a moment longer, partly because I was still gathering my strength, and partly because I wanted to hear more before anyone realized I was awake. The second voice belonged to a man, older, formal, the kind of voice that belonged to someone used to being listened to, without question. "The council will not be pleased," he said, "a human, elevated to the protection of the royal house. They will call it reckless, they will call it dangerous." "Let them call it whatever they like," the Princess Queen said. "I did not ask for their approval when I decided my daughter deserved to live." I opened my eyes at that point, mostly because the ceiling above me was unfamiliar, pale and curved, glowing faintly with soft blue light, and I wanted to know exactly where I had ended up. "Ah," the Princess Queen said, turning toward the bed the moment she noticed movement. "He is awake." The older man beside her, dressed in the deep green robes of a palace advisor, looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between suspicion and disbelief. He had the kind of face that had probably not smiled in decades. "How do you feel?" the Princess Queen asked, stepping closer to the bed, her earlier fury softening into something more careful. "Like I got hit by something meant to kill me," I said, my voice rough. Which I suppose is fairly accurate. A small sound escaped her, something close to a laugh, though it did not quite make it all the way there. "The healers say your body did something they have never seen before. The wound sealed itself within hours. They say your blood behaves differently than ours, that it rushes to protect itself the moment danger appears." "We call that clotting," I said. "It is not exactly rare where I come from." "It is rare here," she said quietly. "It is the reason you are alive, and the reason my daughter still has someone to hold her hand when she is frightened." I tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled against the healing wound across my chest, and the advisor beside her cleared his throat loudly. "Princess Queen," he said, "we still have matters of protocol to discuss. The council will demand answers regarding the assassin's identity and regarding what to do with the human who intervened." "His name is Daniel," she said, her tone suddenly cold enough to freeze the room. "Not the human, Daniel." The advisor bowed his head slightly, chastened, though I could see in his eyes that he was far from finished arguing his case. He excused himself a moment later, leaving the room with the stiff, controlled walk of someone who was furious, but too disciplined to show it openly. Once he was gone, the Princess Queen pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down, folding her hands in her lap, studying me with an intensity that made me feel like she was trying to solve a puzzle she had never encountered before. "Where is Alira?" I asked, before she could speak. "Sleeping, finally," she said. "She refused to leave your side for the first several hours. I had to promise her that you were not going to disappear before she agreed to rest." "I would not have disappeared," I said. "I made her a promise." "I know," the Princess Queen said, and something in the way she said it made me think she had been turning that fact over in her mind for hours, examining it from every angle, trying to understand it. That is precisely the problem. "I do not understand," I admitted. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her folded hands as if searching for the right words in a language that suddenly felt insufficient. "In our culture," she finally said, "we do not touch royalty, not out of fear, not entirely, but out of respect for how fragile we are. A single blow that would leave a bruise on you could end a Velkaran life. Our guards are trained to intercept threats from a distance, never to place their own bodies between danger and the one they protect, because doing so would mean nothing. Two fragile bodies dying instead of one solves nothing." "That sounds like a lonely way to protect someone," I said. "It is the only way we have ever known," she said, "until today." She looked up at me then, and there was something raw in her expression, something that looked almost like grief, mixed with wonder. "You did something no Velkaran has ever done for another person, Daniel. You placed your own life between danger and my daughter's, not because you were ordered to, not because protocol demanded it, but because some instinct in you decided her life mattered more than your own safety in that single second." "It is not that unusual," I said quietly. "Where I come from, people do that for each other. Parents do it for children. Soldiers do it for each other. It is not bravery exactly. It is just what you do when someone you care about is in danger. It is not just what you do here," she said. "It has never been what anyone here could do. We do not have bodies built to survive something like that. We have never had the option to make that choice." I thought about that for a while, the silence stretching comfortably between us, filled only with the soft hum of the healing equipment nearby. "There is an old law," she said eventually, breaking the silence herself. "From before my mother's time, from before the Dominion expanded beyond our home system, a law that states when someone gives their life, or nearly gives their life, to protect a member of the royal bloodline, that person becomes bound to the house they protected. Not as a servant, not as a prisoner, as family, in every sense but blood. I did not do it for a reward," I said, feeling a small knot of worry forming in my chest. "I did not do it hoping to gain anything." "I know," she said. "That is exactly why the law exists. It was never meant for those who calculated the benefit beforehand. It was meant for the rare few who acted purely on instinct, on love, on some part of themselves too fast for calculation." "So what does that mean?" I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer. "It means the council will fight me on this," she said. "It means there will be nobles who see a human bound to my house as an insult, or as a threat, or as a curiosity to be studied and exploited. It means your life is about to become far more complicated than it already was." "And what does it mean for you?" I asked. She held my gaze for a long moment before answering, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I had heard it before. "It means I am not letting you leave," she said. "Not now, not after what you did for my daughter. I do not care what the law says or does not say. I have already decided, Daniel. You are staying." I did not know how to respond to that, lying there in a bed on an alien world, bound by blood and choice, to a family that was not my own, to a child who had already wrapped herself around my heart without my permission, and to a queen who had just told me, in no uncertain terms, that I no longer had a say in the matter. Outside the window, the twin suns of the Velkaran homeworld were setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, and somewhere down the hall, Illyra was sleeping soundly, for the first time since the attack. Safe, because I had made a choice I would make again without hesitation. I did not know yet how dangerous that choice was about to become, or how many enemies I had just made simply by staying alive. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty as I lay there watching the alien sunset paint the walls of my room in fire. I was not going anywhere. 2 days later, I finally understood exactly how many people wanted me gone. It started with a knock at the door of my recovery room, gentle and formal, followed by the entrance of a Velkaran woman I did not recognize, dressed in robes of deep silver that marked her as a member of the council. "You are the human," she said, her tone carrying none of the warmth the Princess Queen had shown me. "I am here to inform you of the council's decision regarding your situation." I was under the impression the Princess Queen had already made that decision, I said carefully. "The Princess Queen does not sit on the council," the woman said, a thin, cold smile crossing her face. "She commands respect, certainly, but even she must answer to the collective voice of the Dominion's ruling families. And the collective voice is not pleased." "What exactly are they not pleased about?" I asked, though I already had a fairly good guess. "A human," she said, "elevated to a position of protection within the royal house, is unprecedented, dangerous. It sets an example that could be exploited by other outsiders seeking influence within our government. There are those among us who believe you orchestrated the attack yourself, simply to gain this position." I felt my jaw tighten at that, the accusation landing harder than I expected. "I nearly died protecting a child," I said. "If that was a strategy, it was a poor one." "Or a very clever one," she said, "designed to appear as though you had no ulterior motive at all." I did not have an answer for that kind of twisted logic, the kind that could turn an act of instinct into evidence of a conspiracy, simply because the truth was too strange to accept easily. I was still searching for the right words when the door opened again, and Illyra walked in, followed closely by one of her caretakers. The silver-robed woman's expression shifted immediately, the coldness replaced by careful, practiced politeness, the kind reserved for royalty even by those who resented them. "Princess Illyra," she said, bowing her head slightly. "Councilwoman Issa," Illyra said, her small voice carrying a formal weight that seemed far too heavy for a child her age. "Why are you here?" "Discussing matters of protocol," Issa said smoothly. "About Daniel?" Illyra asked, walking straight past the councilwoman to stand beside my bed, taking my hand in both of hers without hesitation. "Yes," Issa admitted, clearly uncomfortable now. "He saved my life," Illyra said simply, looking directly at the councilwoman with an intensity that seemed startling coming from someone so young. "Whatever you are trying to decide about him, remember that. He saved my life, and I will not forget it, even if the council does." Issa's expression flickered, something almost like discomfort crossing her features before she composed herself again. "Of course, Princess. That will certainly be taken into consideration." She left the room shortly after, and I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. "You did not have to do that," I told Illyra. "Yes, I did," she said, climbing carefully onto the edge of my bed, mindful of the healing wound across my chest. "Nobody gets to decide you are a problem just because you saved me. That is not fair, and I will not let it happen." I looked at this small girl, 7 years old by any measure, speaking with the conviction of someone far older, and I felt something shift inside my chest that had nothing to do with the wound still healing there. I had come to this palace as a formality. I was leaving that role behind whether I wanted to or not, and something told me the fight to keep me here had only just begun. A week after the attack, I was finally strong enough to walk the palace halls on my own, though the healers insisted I return every evening for what they called observation, mostly because they still could not fully explain how quickly my body had recovered. I did not mind the attention. It gave me something to focus on other than the constant murmur of nobles whispering whenever I passed, their eyes following me with a mixture of fascination and distrust. The Princess Queen summoned me to her private chambers on the morning of the 8th day, and I arrived to find her standing at a wide window overlooking the capital, her hands folded behind her back, her posture rigid in a way that told me something serious had happened. "The assassin spoke," she said, without turning around. Under careful questioning, he revealed the name of the noble house that hired him. "Which house?" I asked. "House Valeth," she said, finally turning to face me, her expression carved from stone. "A family that has coveted the throne for 3 generations, ever since my grandmother's time, when they lost a succession dispute they still believe was unfair. And they targeted Illyra because she is your heir," I said, the pieces falling into place quickly. "They targeted her because removing her removes the clearest path to the throne remaining within my bloodline," the Princess Queen said. "Without an heir, the succession becomes contested, and a contested succession is exactly the kind of chaos House Valeth has been waiting for." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. This was never just one man acting alone. "No," she said, "it was the opening move in something far larger, and now that their first attempt has failed, thanks to you, I have no doubt they are already planning something worse." "What do you need from me?" I asked, and I meant it without hesitation, because whatever complicated feelings I still had about being bound to this house, I had none whatsoever about protecting a child who trusted me with her life. The Princess Queen studied me for a long moment before answering. "I need you close to Illyra at all times. Closer than any guard has ever been allowed. I need you inside rooms my own soldiers are forbidden to enter, because you are the only one capable of physically standing between her and a threat without dying the moment you try. That is a heavy responsibility for someone the Council still does not fully trust," I said. "The Council's trust is not required," she said. "Mine is enough." I nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what she was asking, and more importantly, understanding that I had already made this decision the moment I stepped in front of a weapon meant for someone else. "There is something else," she said, hesitating slightly, which was unusual for a woman who rarely showed uncertainty. "The ancient law I mentioned, the one binding you to this house. I have formally invoked it. The Council cannot overturn it, though they will certainly try to weaken its terms." "What does that mean for me exactly?" I asked. "It means you are no longer simply a foreign liaison attached to a treaty," she said. "It means, in the eyes of Velkaran law, you are considered part of this household. Not a servant, not a prisoner, despite what some in the Council whisper. Something closer to what your people might call family, though I understand the word carries different weight for humans." I let that settle for a moment, feeling the strangeness of it, the way my entire life had shifted direction in the space of a single second when I stepped between a child and a weapon meant to kill her. "I did not expect any of this when I woke up that morning," I admitted. "Neither did I," the Princess Queen said, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw something soften in her expression, something almost vulnerable. "I have buried people I loved, Daniel. My mother, my sister, both taken by violence. This palace pretends does not exist behind its beautiful walls. I have grown accustomed to losing people I care about. I was prepared to lose my daughter that day. I had already begun grieving in the seconds before I reached her, because everything I know about the world told me that no one survives a strike like that standing between danger and someone else. But she did not need grieving," I said quietly. "No," the Princess Queen said, "because of you." We stood there in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid settling comfortably between us, until a soft chime interrupted the moment, signaling a visitor at the chamber door. Illyra entered a moment later, practically running across the room the instant she saw me, wrapping her arms around my waist in a hug that still made the healing wound across my chest ache slightly, though I said nothing about it. "Mother said you would be staying," she said, looking up at me with wide, hopeful eyes. "Staying for real, not just until you get better." "That is what your mother tells me," I said, glancing over at the Princess Queen, who offered the faintest hint of a smile. "Good," Illyra said firmly, "because I already decided you are not allowed to leave." "Is that so?" I said, unable to hide my own smile. "Yes," she said. I am the princess. I get to decide things. You certainly do, the Princess Queen said, brushing a hand gently over her daughter's hair, though her eyes remained on me, serious once again. Which is precisely why we need to discuss your protection more carefully, Alira. The people responsible for what happened have not been caught yet, not all of them. Alira's small smile faded slightly, replaced by something more solemn, a maturity that no child her age should have needed to develop so quickly. Are they going to try again? She asked quietly. Neither of us answered immediately, and that silence told her everything she needed to know. They might, I finally said, choosing honesty over comfort, because I had learned quickly that Alira deserved the truth, even difficult truth, more than she deserved comfortable lies. But if they do, I will be there. That is a promise. You promise a lot of things, she said, looking up at me with an expression that mixed trust and worry in equal measure. I intend to keep every single one of them, I said. She seemed to accept that, nodding slowly, before turning back toward her mother with a question that surprised both of us. Can Daniel stay in the rooms near mine? Not far away like the other guards. Close, like family stays close. The Princess Queen glanced at me, considering the request, and something in her expression told me she had already been planning exactly that before her daughter even asked. Yes, she said simply. He will stay close. Later that evening, after Alira had finally gone to sleep under the watchful eyes of her usual attendants, I found myself standing on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens, the twin moons of the Velcaran homeworld casting pale light across rows of flowering plants I did not recognize. The advisor who had argued with the Princess Queen on the day I woke up approached quietly, standing beside me without invitation. You should know, he said, his voice lacking its earlier hostility, replaced instead by something more measured, that not everyone in this palace resents your presence. Could have fooled me, I said. The council fears what it does not understand, he said, and they understand very little about humans. Your species survived things that would have ended ours in an instant. That kind of resilience is unsettling to a people who have built their entire civilization around fragility and careful protection. I did not choose to be resilient, I said. It is simply how my species evolved. Perhaps, he said, but resilience without cruelty, strength without conquest, that is rarer than you might think, even among your own kind, if the stories about your species' history are accurate. They are accurate, I admitted. We have plenty of cruelty in our history too. And yet you chose, in that single instant, to protect a child who was not your own, from a species not your own, without a moment's hesitation, he said. That tells me something about the man standing on this balcony, regardless of what the council chooses to believe about the species he belongs to. I did not have a response for that, so I simply nodded, and we stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moonlight settle over the gardens below. House Valeth will not stop with one attempt, he said eventually, his voice growing serious again. They have waited 3 generations for an opportunity like this. They will not surrender it easily. Then I suppose I will not be leaving any time soon, I said. No, he agreed. I suppose you will not. Somewhere below us, in the gardens bathed in pale silver light, I thought I saw movement among the shadows, quick and deliberate, gone before I could be certain it was ever there at all. I filed the observation away carefully, the way I had learned to do in every dangerous posting I had ever served, and I made a quiet promise to myself that whatever House Valeth was planning next, they would find me ready and waiting. I had already given this family everything I had once, without hesitation, without calculation. I was prepared to do it again. 3 weeks passed before House Valeth made its next move, and when it finally came, it did not arrive as a single assassin in a crowded hallway. It arrived as something far more patient, far more dangerous, and far harder to see coming. It began with a formal invitation. The Princess Queen received it on a quiet morning, delivered by a messenger dressed in the deep crimson colors of House Valeth itself, a bold and almost insulting gesture given everything that had already happened. The invitation requested her presence, along with Alira, at a gathering meant to celebrate a treaty renewal between several noble houses, an event that had been planned for over a year and could not easily be cancelled without raising suspicion or causing a diplomatic incident. "They know we cannot refuse without consequences," the Princess Queen said, pacing across her private chamber with the invitation still clutched in her hand. "Refusing would look like an accusation without proof, and the Council would use that against me. So we accept," I said, "and we go in prepared. We go in surrounded by enemies who have already proven they are willing to harm a child to gain power," she said. "I do not like this, Daniel." "Neither do I admitted. "But hiding Alira away forever is not a solution either. Eventually, they find another way in. Better we control the situation than let them dictate it." The Princess Queen studied me for a long moment, weighing the risk, before finally nodding once, sharp and decisive. "You will be at her side the entire evening," she said. "No exceptions." "I would not have it any other way," I said. The gathering was held in the grand atrium of House Valeth's ancestral estate, a massive structure built from pale white stone that seemed to glow faintly under the light of 1,000 crystal lanterns hanging from the ceiling. Nobles from across the Dominion moved through the space in their elegant robes, exchanging polite conversation and careful smiles, the kind of smiles that hid far more than they revealed. I stayed close to Alira the entire evening, dressed in formal attire that felt stiff and unfamiliar against my skin, my eyes constantly scanning the crowd for anything that felt wrong. Alira, to her credit, handled the formal atmosphere with a poise that impressed even the most skeptical nobles watching her, greeting guests with practiced grace, despite the fear I knew she carried quietly beneath the surface. "You are doing well," I murmured to her during a brief lull in the receiving line. "I am scared," she admitted quietly, her small hand finding mine beneath the folds of her formal robe, hidden from the watching eyes around us. "I know," I said, "but you are still doing well." The host of House Valeth, an older Velkaran man named Doran Valeth, approached us near the center of the atrium, his smile polished and practiced, his eyes betraying nothing of whatever calculations were happening behind them. "Princess Alira," he said, bowing formally, "and her human protector. Your reputation precedes you, Daniel. The entire Dominion speaks of little else these days. I imagine some of that conversation is not particularly kind," I said evenly. "Some of it certainly," he admitted with a thin smile. "Fear often disguises itself as caution, does it not? A creature capable of surviving a killing blow is bound to make people uneasy, regardless of the good intentions behind the act." "My intentions were simple," I said, "protecting a child from harm." "Of course," he said smoothly, "a noble instinct. Rare, in my experience, among outsiders unfamiliar with our customs." I did not trust the warmth in his voice, not for a single moment, and I kept my attention divided carefully between the conversation and the rest of the room, watching the movement of servants, the positioning of guards, anything that felt slightly out of place. It was nearly an hour later, during a lull in the evening's formal proceedings, when I noticed it, a servant carrying a tray of drinks toward the section of the atrium where Alira sat with several other young nobles, moving with the same too-still deliberation I remembered from the attacker weeks before. My instincts screamed before my mind fully processed why. "Alira," I said quietly, moving toward her immediately, "come with me now." She did not question it, rising immediately and following me away from the seating area, just as the servant reached the space we had vacated. I glanced back in time to see him place the tray down and step back quickly, his eyes darting nervously toward the exit. "Something is wrong with those drinks," I said quietly to the nearest guard, my voice low but urgent. "Do not let anyone touch them." The guard hesitated only a moment before calling out a warning, and the resulting commotion drew the attention of several nobles nearby, including Doran Valeth himself, whose expression shifted from polished calm to something far more calculating as the situation unfolded. The healers who examined the drinks confirmed within minutes that they had been laced with a compound capable of stopping a Velkaran heart within moments of consumption, disguised carefully within the sweet, fragrant liquid that had been served throughout the evening. This was meant for the children's section, one of the healers said grimly, and Princess Alira was seated closest to where the tray was placed. The Princess Queen, who had rushed to the scene the moment word reached her, turned toward Doran Valeth with an expression cold enough to freeze the entire atrium. "An unfortunate coincidence," Doran said smoothly, though his composure had cracked slightly at the edges. "I assure you, Princess Queen, House Valeth would never condone such an act within our own home." "And yet it happened within your own home," the Princess Queen said, her voice dangerously quiet, "for the second time in a month, involving my daughter specifically." "I am as horrified as you are," Doran said, though the words rang hollow even to my ears. The evening ended shortly after, cut short by the chaos of the discovered poison. Guests ushered out quickly, amid whispered accusations and nervous glances, the polished veneer of the gathering shattered entirely. Back within the safety of the palace walls, the Princess Queen paced her chamber once again, fury radiating from her in waves. "He will deny everything," she said. "He will claim ignorance, claim sabotage by a rival house, claim anything necessary to avoid direct blame, and without solid proof, the council will accept his excuses, because removing a house as powerful as Valeth requires more evidence than a servant's suspicious behavior." "Then we get more evidence," I said. "How exactly do you propose we do that?" she asked, exhaustion beginning to show beneath her fury. "The servant who carried that tray," I said. "He was nervous, scared even." Men who are simply following orders from a house they fear do not usually look that afraid unless they know exactly what they are risking. Find him, and I suspect he will tell us everything, given the right incentive. The Princess Queen considered this for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "I will have him found." It took less than a day for palace investigators to locate the servant, a young man named Corin, who had been employed by House Valeth for several years, and who broke down within minutes of careful questioning, confessing that he had been threatened with harm to his own family unless he cooperated with the poisoning attempt. "They said if I refused," Corin said, his voice trembling as he spoke to the Princess Queen directly, "they would ensure my sister never saw another sunrise. I did not want to hurt anyone, Princess Queen. I swear it on everything I hold sacred." "Who gave you the order?" the Princess Queen asked, her voice gentler now, recognizing genuine fear when she saw it. "Doran Valeth himself," Corin said. "He said the human protector had become an obstacle they could no longer work around, and that removing the heir entirely was the only remaining solution." The confession, combined with physical evidence recovered from House Valeth's private chambers, was enough finally to bring the matter before the full council, where even Doran Valeth's considerable influence could not fully protect him from the weight of the evidence stacked against his house. "House Valeth will face formal charges," the Princess Queen told me later that evening, standing once again on the same balcony where I had spoken with her advisor weeks before. "It will not be a quick process. Noble houses have protections built into centuries of law, protections designed to prevent hasty accusations from destroying entire family lines. But the evidence is strong enough that they will not escape consequences entirely." "And Elira?" I asked. "Is she safe now?" "Safer," the Princess Queen said carefully, "but not entirely safe. House Valeth has allies within the council, allies who will not simply abandon their ambitions because one plot failed. I suspect there will be more attempts before this is finally resolved." "Then I will be ready for them," I said, and I meant it with the same certainty I had felt the very first moment I stepped between Elira and a weapon meant to end her life. The Princess Queen turned to look at me then, her expression thoughtful, searching, as if she were trying to understand something about me that still did not quite make sense within the framework of everything she knew about the universe. "Why do you keep choosing this?" she asked quietly. "You could have left after your treaty obligations ended. You could have returned home long before any of this happened. Instead, you stayed, And now you continue to risk your life for a family that is not your own, for a species that is not your own. I considered the question carefully before answering, because I owed her an honest answer, not a simple one. Where I come from, I said, we do not choose who deserves protection based on species, or bloodline, or politics. We choose based on whether someone needs it, and whether we are capable of giving it. Illyra needed it. I was capable. Everything after that was simply the natural result of those two facts existing together. That is a very human way of looking at the world, she said. It is the only way I know how to look at it, I said. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the gardens below, before finally speaking again, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. When this is finally over, she said, when House Valeth has answered for what they have done, and Illyra is finally safe from this threat, I want you to know that you will always have a place within this house, Daniel. Not because ancient law demands it, because you have earned it through everything you have already given us. I already told you, I said, I am not going anywhere. Somewhere below us, in the moonlit gardens where I had once thought I saw movement in the shadows weeks before, everything remained perfectly still. But I had learned by now never to trust stillness completely, not in a palace where danger wore silk robes and polished smiles, and I found myself already preparing for whatever House Valeth's allies might attempt next. The fight was far from over. And I intended to be standing at the end of it, exactly where I had promised I would be. The formal charges against House Valeth moved slower than any of us wanted, tangled in centuries of legal tradition designed to protect noble families from hasty accusations. Weeks turned into months, and though Doran Valeth remained under close watch, stripped gradually of influence within the council, he remained free, his estate untouched, his resources still considerable enough to cause trouble if he chose to use them. I did not trust the silence that followed. Neither did the Princess Queen. He is planning something larger, she said one evening, several months after the poisoning attempt, as we reviewed reports gathered by palace investigators. The charges against him have stripped away his patience. A cornered creature becomes far more dangerous than a confident one. What kind of resources does he still have access to? I asked. More than I would like, she admitted. House Valeth controls several private security forces, technically legal under old treaties predating the current council structure. If he decides to act outside the boundaries of politics entirely, he has the means to do so. I felt the familiar cold weight settle in my stomach, the same sensation that had warned me weeks before Illyra's first attack. Something was coming, something larger than a single assassin or a poisoned drink, and I intended to be ready for it. The warning finally arrived on a stormy evening, nearly 5 months after I had first stepped between Illyra and a weapon meant to kill her. Rain hammered against the palace windows, thunder rolling across the capital city in long, deep waves, when one of the palace guards burst into the private quarters where Illyra and I were reviewing her evening lessons together. "Perimeter breach," the guard said, breathless, his formal composure cracked with genuine fear. "Unauthorized vessels detected approaching the eastern wing. Security forces are already engaging." I was on my feet immediately, pulling Illyra up with me, her lesson materials scattering forgotten across the floor. "Stay behind me," I told her, and she nodded, her earlier fear replaced by something steadier, something that had grown stronger over the months since our first encounter with danger together. The palace alarms began sounding moments later, a deep, resonant tone that echoed through every hallway, accompanied by the distant sound of energy weapons discharging somewhere in the eastern sections of the palace grounds. "This is not a small attack," I said, my mind racing through possibilities as I guided Illyra toward the reinforced safe room built into the royal family's private quarters, a precaution installed after the first assassination attempt months before. We had barely reached the corridor leading to the safe room when the Princess Queen appeared, flanked by several guards, her expression grim but controlled. "House Valeth," she said without preamble. "A full assault on the eastern security perimeter. They have abandoned political maneuvering entirely." "How many?" I asked. "Unknown," she said, but enough to breach our outer defenses within minutes. This was planned carefully, Daniel. They knew exactly where our vulnerabilities lay. Then we get Illyra somewhere they cannot reach, I said, and we hold them there until reinforcements arrive. The safe room was built deep within the palace, accessible only through a series of reinforced corridors monitored constantly by palace security. We moved quickly, the Princess Queen leading the way, guards forming a protective perimeter around Illyra as we navigated the winding halls, the sound of distant fighting growing louder with each passing minute. We were still 2 corridors away from safety when the first group of attackers found us. They came from a side passage, dressed in the deep crimson colors of House Valeth's private security force, weapons already raised, moving with the coordinated efficiency of soldiers who had clearly rehearsed this exact scenario. The palace guards accompanying us reacted immediately, engaging the attackers in the narrow corridor, but I could see immediately that we were outnumbered. "Go," I told the Princess Queen, pushing Illyra toward her. "Get her to the safe room. I will hold them here." "Daniel," the Princess Queen started, but I was already moving, placing myself between the fighting and the narrow passage they needed to escape through. "Go," I said again, more firmly this time. "I will catch up." She hesitated only a moment longer before nodding, pulling Illyra along with her, disappearing down the corridor with the remaining guards providing cover as they retreated. I turned my full attention to the attackers still blocking the main passage, 3 of them, well-trained, well-armed, moving with the kind of confidence that came from extensive combat experience. I had faced worse odds before, in wars fought on worlds far more hostile than this one, and I intended to make sure these 3 regretted choosing tonight to test exactly how much punishment a human body could absorb before finally giving up. The first attacker lunged toward me with a blade meant to disable rather than kill immediately, likely under orders to capture rather than simply eliminate, and I used that hesitation against him, closing the distance faster than he expected and disarming him before he fully registered what was happening. The second attacker fired his weapon, a bolt of energy that caught my shoulder, burning through fabric and skin, but I had absorbed worse before, and the pain, while sharp, did nothing to slow me down as I continued moving toward him. The fight was brutal and fast, the narrow corridor working in my favor, preventing the attackers from surrounding me effectively. Within minutes, all 3 lay incapacitated on the floor, and I allowed myself only a single breath before continuing down the corridor after the Princess Queen and Illyra, ignoring the burning pain in my shoulder as adrenaline carried me forward. I found them just outside the safe room, but the door remained sealed, the security system apparently damaged during the initial breach, refusing to open despite the Princess Queen's increasingly urgent attempts to override the lock manually. "It will not respond," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. The breach must have damaged the primary control systems. Behind us, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor, more attackers closing in, drawn by the earlier commotion. "There is no time to fix it," I said, scanning the area quickly for alternatives. "We need another way out." "There is a secondary passage," the Princess Queen said, leading toward the western gardens, "but it requires passing directly through the main atrium, which is likely still contested." "Then we go through the atrium," I said. "Staying here means waiting for them to find us eventually." We moved quickly. Illyra held close between us, guards forming a tight protective formation as we navigated toward the main atrium. The sounds of fighting grew louder as we approached, the palace's remaining security forces clearly engaged in a desperate effort to hold the central sections of the building against the ongoing assault. The atrium itself, when we finally reached it, was chaos. Palace guards exchanged fire with House Valeth's forces across the wide-open space, crystal lanterns shattered and scattered across the floor, smoke curling upward from several damaged sections of the elegant architecture that had once hosted formal gatherings and celebrations. "We cannot cross that safely," one of our remaining guards said. "We do not have another choice," I said, already calculating the fastest path across the dangerous space, watching the patterns of fire, the movements of both sides, searching for the narrowest window of opportunity. "There," I said, pointing toward a section along the far wall, temporarily shielded by a fallen support column that provided cover from most angles of fire. "We move now, while their attention is focused on the main engagement." The Princess Queen nodded, and we moved together, staying low, using every available piece of cover as we crossed the dangerous open space. We were nearly to the far side when a figure stepped out from behind a shattered pillar directly in our path. Doran Valith himself, no longer wearing the polished robes of a noble host, dressed instead in tactical gear, a weapon raised and aimed directly at Elira. "Enough of this," he said, his voice carrying none of the smooth politeness from our earlier encounters. "The girl dies tonight, and the succession crisis that follows will finally give my house the opportunity it has waited generations for." I did not hesitate. I placed myself directly between his weapon and Elira, exactly as I had done months before in a hallway that felt like a lifetime ago. "You already tried this," I said. "It did not work then either." "You survived one strike," Doran said, his eyes cold, calculating. "Let us see how many you can survive before your body finally gives out." He fired. The weapon he carried was more powerful than anything used against me before, designed specifically, I would later learn, to overcome whatever unusual resilience my human body possessed. The impact staggered me backward, pain exploding across my chest with an intensity that made the earlier wound feel almost gentle by comparison. I did not fall. I do not fully know where the strength came from in that moment, whether it was pure stubbornness or the memory of every promise I had made to a frightened 7-year-old girl who had trusted me with her life, or simply the deep, unshakable refusal that lived somewhere in the core of every human who had ever stood between danger and someone they loved. But I did not fall, and I did not step aside, and I closed the distance between myself and Doran Valith before he could fire a second time. The fight that followed was short, brutal, and decisive. Whatever advantage his weapon had given him disappeared entirely once the distance between us closed to nothing, and years of training carried me through the pain, radiating across my chest until Doran Valith lay disarmed and defeated on the ground before me, palace guards moving quickly to secure him the moment the immediate danger passed. I turned back toward Elira and the Princess Queen, my legs suddenly unsteady beneath me, the adrenaline that had carried me through the fight finally beginning to fade, leaving only the deep, burning pain of the wound across my chest. "Daniel," Elira said, rushing toward me despite the Princess Queen's attempt to hold her back, wrapping her small arms around me as I finally allowed myself to sink down against the damaged pillar behind me. "I told you," I said, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be. "I would be there when they tried again." "You cannot keep doing this," she said, tears streaming down her face, though whether from fear or relief I could not entirely tell. "You cannot keep almost dying for me." "I am still here," I said, though the world was beginning to tilt at the edges again, familiar and unwelcome. "That is what matters." The Princess Queen knelt beside us, her hand pressing gently against my shoulder, her expression a complicated mixture of gratitude and something that looked almost like fear at how close she had come to losing me entirely. "The medical team is coming," she said. "Stay with us, Daniel. Do not you dare stop fighting now." "Would not dream of it," I managed, before the darkness finally claimed me once again. I woke 3 days later in the same recovery room I had occupied months before, the pale blue light familiar now, comforting in a strange way. Elira was asleep in a chair beside my bed, her small hand still resting on the edge of the mattress, clearly having refused to leave despite everyone's attempts to send her away. The Princess Queen sat nearby, watching over both of us with an expression I had never quite seen on her before, something soft and unguarded that made her look less like a ruler and more simply like a mother grateful for the safety of everyone she loved. "House Valith has been formally dissolved," she said quietly, once she noticed I was awake, careful not to wake Elira. "Doran Valith and his co-conspirators will face justice for their crimes. The threat is finally over, Daniel. Truly over this time." Good, I said, my voice still rough from days of unconsciousness. The Council has also finally accepted what I have known since the moment you first stepped between danger and my daughter, she continued. You are not simply bound to this house by ancient law anymore. You have earned a place here through everything you have given us, through everything you continue to give us, again and again, without hesitation. I already told you, I said, managing a tired smile, I am not going anywhere. I know, she said, reaching over to gently squeeze my hand, and I refuse to let you, even if you tried. Illyra stirred beside me, her eyes opening slowly, widening the moment she realized I was finally awake. You are okay, she said, relief flooding her voice as she climbed carefully onto the edge of my bed, mindful of the healing wound across my chest. I am okay, I confirmed. I told you I would keep my promises. You keep almost breaking them too, she said, though there was no real complaint in her voice, only the deep affection of someone who had learned, through fear and danger, exactly how much she meant to the man who had chosen, again and again, to stand between her and every threat that came her way. I thought back to the moment months before when I had first stepped in front of a weapon meant for her, acting purely on instinct, without calculation, without hesitation. I had not known then how completely that single choice would reshape my entire life, binding me to a family I had never expected to call my own, to a child who had become as precious to me as anyone I had ever known, and to a queen who had made it abundantly clear that she would never allow me to leave. I had come to this palace as a formality, easily forgotten, easily replaced. I was leaving that identity behind entirely, replaced instead by something far more permanent, something I had never expected but would not trade for anything the universe could offer. I was exactly where I belonged, and for the first time since arriving on this world, I finally understood, with complete certainty, that I would not want to be anywhere else.